All right. All right, we're live. Okay, this is good. Oh, somebody just popped in there, Galaxy S9. I have no idea why that happened. And so I'm still getting used to this Zoom software.
Well,
so
it's nice to know that in Galaxy S9, they look like humanoids.
Yeah. So I want to welcome everybody.
Humanoids at that.
We're gonna have a conversation on all things art, see where this goes, if indeed we do end up going down some rabbit holes. I'd mentioned this earlier when I was talking with both Brian and Thomas that I've met Thomas twice, having had him in on a webinar. And I don't know why I contacted you, Thomas. I saw you somewhere and there was something captivating. And then I felt a sort of a simpatico, a connection. I think you're far more artistic than I'll ever aspire to be, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not comparing. I've known Brian for many, many years.
Good.
I've had him when he started busted out in the scene. You know, people bust out on the scene. I tend to grab him early. And I had him come in on a bunch of webinars, and he's graciously been in many, many, many webinars, as well as 2 live events, one in Toronto, Ontario, and one in Nashville. And Brian was always been a crowd favorite because he's very, very creative, and you just no filter. By the way, Brian, people like that about you.
Yeah, if you have children in your room, this would be a good time to send them to watch a Disney film.
No filter, funny as hell, sense of humor, dry sense of humor, but witty. But the thing that was consistent was the level of artisticness, for lack of a better word. And so I thought it would be kind of cool to have these guys in on the conversation. So everybody is welcome to join in, and I'm just going to do a chat and make sure you guys can see. And if anybody wants to ask a question or get in and get their webcam live, you can ask live as well. Or you can send me a chat privately or send a chat on the chat box. If you can't see the chat box, it's there. And I just put out a message, can you read this? So if you guys can read this, I'd appreciate you all going in there, just say I can read it loud and clear. So we're going to talk about art, specifically art and photography, but I guess it's not really art and photography because art is art. Art is eternal. It's infinite. It's since the beginning of humanity and consciousness, I suppose, going back to the cave days, throughout the history of us being on this planet. It's fascinating. For me, it's a money-making thing. So for me, art's always had that 2-sided component to it. I'm a complete sellout. I know, I recognize that. I go after it for the money, but I do enjoy what I do. So I think that's an important component to it. Photograph primarily people, 99% of the time. Earn a good living doing that. I find the art gallery side of things, which is Thomas's world, kind of like a different universe. It's a different dimension. It's over there. I look at it in awe and I'm like, wow, what is that? So maybe we can touch on that in a bit. And then there's BrianDemint, who comes along and he can put on a live model shoot in front of 180 people. And he'll pick stuff out of the lobby of the hotel or the trash can or wherever he can find stuff in the kitchen. He'll just crinkle stuff together and create art from garbage, literally from garbage. I've seen him do it. And it's mind-blowing. So
I've done the same thing. Some of my best textures are when I go into abandoned buildings. Sometimes the trash heaps
cool.
will yield some of the coolest textures.
So that's sort of where I come from, sort of where I see where you guys come from. That's my perspective on it all. And I mean, I guess for the other side of the coin, when I'm talking about the art that I produce in my photography business, which I've been doing over 40 years, there's an artistic element to it, but it's primarily the art is in the marketing and the money-making aspect. That I am a bit of an entrepreneur, I suppose you could put it that way. I don't know that I would continue it if I wasn't doing it. I probably would be. Because I love shooting. I'm always out shooting, even when I'm not. If I'm traveling, if I'm on a holiday, I'm always bringing my camera with me, and I'm constantly looking for opportunities to photograph for the sheer pleasure of it. It feels like I'm a college student when I go out on what I call these crap shoots. They're just a whole lot of fun looking for light in that. But that's just kind of that level. It doesn't really transcend that beyond that. So anyways, having said that, Brian, Thomas, you just mentioned, maybe you can pick it up from here, or Brian, if you have something you want to say. And again, if anybody has any questions, fire away. We're here for you. I mean, literally, it's an open field.
Well, you know, what you were just saying there near the end is the most important thing for me, and regardless of whether you consider yourself a fine art photographer or you're an event photographer, a wedding photographer, a landscape photographer, whatever. Most important thing is what you just said that you do, and that is you enjoy what you do. You have fun. It resonates with you, with who you are. And so, you know, I always tell young photographers who are trying to figure out what they should do to make money, I always say, do what you love, and then you're going to get good at it, and the money will come. You know, so sure, there's fields of photography that will yield more income than others right off the bat, but there's still like heavy competition in it, and you're still going to have to craft an identity. And that, to me, I mean, in the photography world, I noticed there's a lot of pushback against the art term, the artist term, the fine art term, because I think a lot of photographers, they want to eschew being perceived as pretentious. So they're like, you know, I do this kind of photography, or I just do this, or I just do that. But, you know, regardless of what your genre is, I think you need to approach it as a craft, if not an art, as a craft, and always be improving, always be trying to level up. And when you get to that point where you love what you do and you've been doing it for a while and you've created your own unique vision, then people are going to come to you. You're going to stand above the market at that point. So when people come to you because they want that look that you produce that nobody else can do. And it doesn't matter if you're a fine art photographer, a wedding photographer, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that to me is what art is about.
Can I ask you a question in reference to that?
Certainly.
Love what you do, the money will follow, which is a bit of a questionable statement, but I'm only saying that coming from my perspective. You got to a point.
There's a step in there,
yeah,
that between loving what you do and the money will follow.
Yeah,
that is like work your ass off, basically.
Yeah, but there comes a point where you got to take it to the market. Let's just quickly touch on that, and then maybe Brian can chime in.
So when I started later in life. I think it was about 42 when I started doing Photoshop. So I had dabbled with photography when I was a teenager, and then years later I got into Photoshop after about a year of manipulating people's photos on the internet, back what they used to call mod clubs in the kind of the earlier days of the internet. I had so many people say, "Wow, you're really good at that. You should create your own images." So I went out and I got a camera, and that was about 2007 that I got the camera. And I knew, like, I didn't try to monetize it. I had a regular job, I had a day job that I worked, and it was in healthcare, and it left me enough time to be able to work on my craft as well. So I didn't really start thinking about monetizing it until 2010. 2010 is when I started approaching galleries and kind of just dipping my toe in, basically, the fine art world. It really wasn't until 2012 that I started to kind of blow up and have shows at galleries all over the country and the world. And then it was kind of like the momentum was from there, and I just kept going. But I wasn't in a hurry to make money from my camera. And that's another thing that I advise, beginning photographers, is that, learn your craft, enjoy what you're doing. Don't worry about monetizing it right away. Mm-hmm. But, there will come a point when you're going to want to enter the market, and whatever it is, whatever genre, whatever field, you're going to face a lot of competition. So then all the marketing principles apply. And that's when I say, it's time to get start studying marketing and not so much photography.
It gets to a point where there's a critical mass and your art's good enough, so to speak. I would imagine that's what you're saying.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, I think you have to beware of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where somebody, thinks their shit is great when it really isn't.
Talk about that
Unfortunately,
all
there's
the
a lot
time.
of that in a lot of fields. But, because to me, the best artists always are extremely self-critical, are never satisfied, and are always, looking at their work and being like, oh, I could do so much better. And they're just constantly striving. So it's better to have that mindset, but you have to enter, the world, the arena at some point. So, and that's where, even though, it's not, it's generally not a good rule to quote unquote compare yourself to other people. In a way, you kind of have to know who your competition is and what the level, like what's the level of art that's being displayed at a gallery you want to get into, that type of thing. That's where market research comes into.
Dunning-Kruger effect is the opposite of when they got the self-criticism, which a lot of artists suffer from. But at the same time, you see so many who just think they're, and they're not, but they just think that they're really, really good, and they it goes to their head, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I see that all the time, especially in photography. And if I can just draw on one comparison that sort of fits with your background, Thomas, which is music. You got the garage band who's constantly practicing, but they're scared shitless to get out there and play live. They want it to be perfect.
Right.
Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's you can second guess yourself, but I guess the analogy is you have to beware of like getting out there too soon, too, before you've really developed your own unique style or sound. It's the same way in the photography world. I mean, if you decide I'm going to be a wedding photographer, and you kind of look at the kind of standard generic form for a wedding photographer, and then you just do a few like events or weddings, and then you just kind of get out there and put your website out, and you haven't really developed maybe as much as you would if you were a second shooter for somebody who's like a really awesome wedding photographer, and you took some time and kind of learned, and then kind of looked at what the cliches are, and then learned how to go beyond those cliches, or maybe even take the cliche, twist it, and kind of create something new from a cliche, because that to me is a very valid form of creativity as well. Taking something that's a standard and then kind of skewering it somewhat. But the problem is, a lot of people, not just in photography, they see what the standard is, and it always changes, right? Like for instance, right now, it's kind of shifting again, but I mean, I'm doing like a painterly type look, and I've been doing it for a while. That's kind of becoming trendy. I'm seeing a lot of people doing that look, whereas a few years ago, the Brooke Shaden kind of pop surrealism thing was kind of big too. So it's like anything, there's trends that come, and if you're only looking at what's currently popular and that's what you're going to do, you're never going to develop your own identity. I think it's way more important to kind of look beyond what's currently popular to the masters of your craft, the history of your craft, and then more looking at all sorts of art, look at all sorts of film or architecture, just different. You can find inspiration from so many different kinds of creativity, and then apply that to your own photography.
That's some pretty deep thoughts and words, Brian.
Yeah, let me back up just a bit on what we're talking about, monetizing your art, as it were. A lot of times those don't coincide, what you're shooting and what you would like to shoot, making money. You take somebody like Man Ray in the 30s, who was shooting portraits to make money, and then he was making all these little weird surrealistic objects, in the background. So a lot of times it takes, time for people to catch up to what you're doing, and maybe they never will. Duchamp said, he was making objects for people, 25 years in the future, not for his current crowd. So, and it also gets to the point where when I first started, I was, I worked at a power plant for 37 years. So a lot of photographers at that time were like, oh, you're not a real photographer because you're not shooting full time, you're using Photoshop, you never shot film. They had all these reasons why I wasn't a quote unquote a real photographer, and so I guess one thing that's nice about that is like I didn't have to rely on the photography to make money, so I could shoot basically what I wanted to shoot. And there's nothing wrong with being a weekend warrior or whatever. Sometimes you have to put up with a little bit of crap, but it's 15 years later and I'm still, here I am doing a webinar, so they can kiss my ass.
Yeah, and usually when people, my experience is the people that say that, and there's so many of them in the photography world. They're usually, they can't do what you do and they're threatened by it. And I saw a lot of that pushback against Photoshop, because these were guys, they're generally always guys that, they didn't even rely on the darkroom. There were guys that would shoot a roll of film and drop it off at the lab, and then go pick up the prints. So, when you see anybody that tries to say that's not photography, or you're not a photographer because of this, it's usually always coming from a place of fear and of inadequacy. Because sometimes you'll see like the guy who goes, oh, I've been doing this for 30 years and I know, and blah, blah, blah. And Photoshop is, using Photoshop that's just graphic design. You're not a photographer. Well, a lot of times because they're pissed off because a 16-year-old girl on Instagram is like posting like phenomenal images that they know, maybe even through their Dunning-Kruger effect, they know.
I hate those girls.
That, and it's true. I think it's phenomenal that photography has opened up to where the average person can pull out their phone, and some people like it just. I think the more creative people there are, the more people who give a vision to their creative voice. I mean, that's better for all of us. That makes the world a better place.
That's good.
So I don't feel threatened by it at all.
But I want to go back to what Brian was getting at when you were talking about Brian. People were sort of like being critical or not accepting or whatever it was. Externally, that was what you were experiencing, and did it bother you? Or if not, like, did you just say, screw that, I'm just going to go and do what I want to do? And how did you push through it all?
Well, it bothered me for about 20 seconds.
Okay.
Because I got an email from a guy and he's like, Mr. DeMint, I want you to know that I absolutely hate every single image I've seen you produce. So my first reaction was, oh, I thought I sucked. So this, this kind of verifies it.
Who said that? I don't want to name, but was it somebody in the industry with some sort of any kind of status?
I never really took the time to look them up.
Okay. Well, why would people send you that? That's so weird.
Well,
other than what Thomas said, I mean, obviously that could be a valid point.
That's where it's coming from.
Threatened by. Do you think that's what it was, Brian?
I think that some people just don't understand. Like a lot of people look at modern art and they look at, and they just don't understand it. And it's like, I hate it, And I think that they just didn't get where I was coming from. But then I thought, well, shit, maybe this dude likes, baseball and ZZ Top and stuff that I can't freaking stand. Maybe the child molester.
I guarantee you he was one of those veteran photographers who was like pissed off that you came along.
Who likes ZZ Top? You got to be clear on that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was thinking, we're not going to all like the same things. That doesn't mean that what somebody else
nor should
like is bad or whatever. Right.
Right.
So, it, you know, of course it hurt my feelings at first, but
Mhm.
then I thought, you know, well, God, you know, I think about how many people I fucking hate their photography. So,
Mhm.
you
But you
know, it's
wouldn't
a
email
valid
them.
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Would you go out of your way to tell them that? I mean, you know, if
Well,
somebody asks for a
maybe.
critique, well, if somebody asks for a
Yeah.
critique, you know, I will still find something. I will start it off with something positive, like
Right.
you're good at
Big.
this. Like I like this, and then well, you could you know work on this. But to just go tell somebody I don't like the images you produce, I mean, what's
It's pretty
it's not
shallow.
really helpful.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I can't imagine somebody sending that letter and then feeling okay with it.
Right.
I mean, not to, you know, I would have thought that at some point they would have thought that's kind of a shitty thing to do, you know,
Mhm.
and write me back and say, wow, hey,
I
sorry,
think,
dude.
I think more importantly though is the fact that you didn't let it bother you, and that's because
Well, you know, you can, this is one thing that I'm going to bring up print competitions because I see a lot of people get their feelings hurt really hard on these print competitions. And man,
Yeah.
it is like, oh my
Doesn't mean
God.
anything.
It doesn't mean a damn thing at
Doesn't
all.
mean
None zero.
anything.
You cannot compare two images. You can't compare
Mhm.
a picture of, you know, a Brooke
Right.
Shaden picture or one of your images
Right.
against
Right.
a newborn, you know, and
Right.
assign a value to it. I mean, actually assign a number to it. It's this number. So, yeah, that's a tough one for me because they give out awards for people staying within the perimeters of what they think is correct art.
Mhm.
So, you know, if you look at people like Picasso and Pollock and Duchamp and, you know, Lenore Carrington and all these other people, we would have got to where we were in the art world, which some people would think, oh, that'd be fantastic.
Mhm.
But but we would, you know, if you stay within the perimeters of what other people think you should be shooting, we're all going to be shooting the same thing.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. That's a really good point.
It's
You
the same thing with juried shows. Like, you know, what I've learned to do is if I'm interested in a you know, a juried show is usually a foot in the door to a gallery. So it's kind of like they, you know, it'll be a group show and usually it'll be a theme. So, and I set, you know, little Google alerts for certain keywords. So I'll,
Mhm.
you know, and I'm on a bunch of websites like callforentries.org and places like that where
Mhm.
you can find out about shows. But usually the first thing I do, you know, after determining like, oh, this might be a cool show to submit my work to, so I go look at the jurors and I look at their websites because they're usually always photographers or painters, and I can tell by looking at their work if it's going to resonate with mine because I know like Brian, you probably run into this too. I know that if I'm submitting my work and the judge is somebody who's like a purist, who's like everything, either they shoot film or their work is filmic and black and white and kind of traditional photography, I'm not even going to bother with submitting my work to them because I know that's their aesthetic and that's going to be the aesthetic for the show. And they're going to look at my work and go, well, this doesn't even look like photography. So, you know, now, you know, occasionally you might find somebody who's, you know, has a bigger vision than just the kind of work they produce. But I've found that that's actually a pretty good litmus test for
Okay.
whether I'm going to be right for a show or not.
You could apply the same principle to print competitions. The judges are going to have that equal bias.
Yeah. Well, you
Cool.
can look at what's won in the past and, you know,
Yeah.
in that
There's
type
many
of
trends too.
Right.
I find it, let me ask you both a question about back to print competitions, and possibly might apply to juried shows and people who are trying to get into them. Not an area I know a lot about. I know a lot about print competitions. Ironically enough, I've had Brian on many print competitions that we've run as webinars where he would analyze and rate prints, and he agonizes over it. Agonizes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do. I don't want to hurt people's feelings because,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, people put
Yeah.
out the best, you know, I guarantee you the people that submit those images, they're submitting the best images that they think they have.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not submitting images where they really want feedback because they need help on those images.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel a lot of times they submit what the best thing they have. And then if I come along and say, God, could somebody remove my eyes and throw them in a
Right.
trash can? Then,
Yeah, I
then
know.
I don't
Yeah, you
want to.
feel bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
But you,
remember once, I used to work, when I worked in a music store, we sold gear, and there's a lot of the hip hop community bought gear from us. And I came into work one day, and there's this god awful hip hop playing, and I walked in and very loudly said, "What is this shit that we're listening to?"
mm-hmm.
And they're like, "It's those guys' record right there." These guys are standing right there. They were not very happy with me, and I was like,
Oh, I thought
I
maybe
felt terrible.
I maybe thought maybe that's where they coined the
But
phrase. Oh, that's a shit.
right,
It's good now.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me finish my question about print competition, and the other side to it that is of value to the person who is competing. I mean, in spite of the fact, and I agree with you guys, that print competitions don't mean a thing, but the person who is entering print competition, they're challenging themselves. They are trying to become better artists, better photographers, and produce higher quality work. Is there not some value in that experience, or in your opinion, do you think it's even necessary? They can find it in alternate ways, better ways, more.
I definitely think there's value in the experience, and anything that you embark on like that, you can learn from. Even if it's like, I'm not going to do that anymore. You should at least try and do the experience. So I mean, I think it is worthwhile in that sense. When I say it doesn't mean anything, I mean it in the long term. It doesn't really make you a better artist. Like getting a critique from like a really good artist, or getting like a portfolio review from somebody who's going to spend some time with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a really good thing.
That's much deeper. That's got more layers to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Versus print competition where there's hundreds and hundreds.
Right. Yeah. Where somebody can sit down, and even if it's somebody you throw a few bucks at them, and sit down with them for get a half an hour or an hour of their time,
Mm-hmm.
and look through, and it's really, I think it's best to do it. My studio neighbor Zach Arias, he used to do that for a while. He was doing those, like, I think he had some YouTube videos of, he would just kind of, people would send him their website, and then he would spend like maybe 15 minutes on each one. And sometimes he was kind of brutal, but sometimes people I guess need to hear the brutal truth.
Yeah, like Brian when he got that email.
For me,
Well,
I think a lot of it has to do with how sensitive that you are
right,
to what people think about your
right.
work. So, because I do know people that have said, I've done so poorly, I just feel like I should quit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
What do you tell them?
God, have you seen the judges' work? It sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think there's value, but you have to know what to take and what takeaways you need and what takeaways you need to leave there.
Yeah.
So I think self-study and making sure you understand the elements and principles of design and composition and those type of things. So, it definitely has its value. But one of the things that I guess I don't like about print competition is that a lot of times they'll make a suggestion, or the judges will make a suggestion. They'll go home, make these changes, re-enter it into a different print competition, take those judges' suggestions, and then it keeps going. How many suggestions do you take before it's not your work anymore?
Right.
So
true. Well, individuality then. So let's get to that. I'm going to ask you both a question, and sort of ties in with what you just said, Brian. When did you realize that you sort of had a specific brand, so for lack of a better word, a specific look, where you knew it was coming together and the pieces you were creating were like, ooh, yeah, I feel good about this? this is going to make some waves. This is going to have some impact. This is going to possibly
Well,
get me.
for me, it was my very first shoot. And it didn't, I never imagined that anybody else would even give a shit about it. All I cared about was that I hadn't made art in 20 years. I used to be a painter, and then I played video games for 20 years. And then I did a photo shoot. And
Okay.
I went home and I told my wife, and I said, I don't believe in divine destiny or whatever, but if I was here to do anything, it's this.
Okay.
This I can do.
I got to ask you a question before we continue. This is a really, really fascinating point, and I want to hear your input on it, Thomas. But Brian, you were an artist way back before you got into video games. You were into, so you've got a background in art.
Well, I used to paint. I went to college for art, but it was a very subjective. We were still drawing, bison skulls. 3 years later. So
that
it was worthless.
That all went dormant for a couple decades, and then boom, it came back. Is that sort of what
happened?
Well,
not exactly. I quit college and I started painting on my own, and actually started learning quite a bit. And then my previous wife decided that I would never be able to make money as an artist, and thought it was kind of a joke. And if you'd like to meet her, just draw a pentagram on the floor and start chanting. I'm pretty sure she'll show up. Or if you want to call her, number 666. So, but so I quit what I was doing, and I went to work at the power plant full time. But then I started building websites, and I always did little things that, I started using Photoshop and things like that. So I always did things a little bit in the background. But, I'm like Thomas. I didn't start shooting till I was 42. So, but I don't think I could have started shooting a day earlier, because my photography is the combination of everything that I took in during that time frame. So we watched all of these foreign movies because they didn't have money to blow shit up, so they actually had to have a story and actors. And then the things that I was
good
reading.
Lighting too, usually.
Exactly, perfect.
There's German expressionism, right?
Exactly, that kind of stuff. My favorite director is Ingmar Bergman. So
phenomenal imagery.
Psychological dramas from the 60s, 50s. So, I think I needed all that before I could just start shooting. Because when I do a shoot, I just go in and we shoot 4 different things, and I don't make any plans beforehand. So I wouldn't be able to do that if I was 19 and no experiences.
Yeah, it sounds we have very similar approach, because I look at the same way. Like I call it the visual vocabulary, like all the art that you've seen, films that you've seen, things that resonate with you, they go into your brain. It goes back for me, like when I was a little kid, my parents had, I remember they had Andrew Wyeth's Christina's World, print of that hanging up on the mantle. And then we had books like on Rembrandt and Da Vinci and all the Dutch masters. And I used to, Edward Hopper, just, different painters, Andrew Wyeth, and I would look through and I was just fascinated by it. And that just kind of stuck in my brain. And then I dabbled in photography a little bit when in high school, even, did some darkroom work. But then I got into rock and roll, heard the Sex Pistols, the Ramones, went out, got a guitar, played in punk bands all through the 80s. Then I started playing the harp in the 90s and was successful as a musician. And then when I got into Photoshop, it was almost from the onset of that I kind of, because of all the artwork that I had liked and the concepts that I had taken in. And another thing that really kind of, and since you like Bergman, I think you'll understand this. I really got into like mythology, Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, a lot of like taking these like archetypes and these like deep symbolism things and like putting them in to art to where it's not not overt, but it's there. So
Right.
it gives it like a depth, and people realize there's something underneath the surface without knowing what it is. And a lot of times I don't know. That's why when you're saying you don't know what you're going to do, it's the same thing for me. It's intuition. When I shoot with a model, I mean, the only thing we'll talk about beforehand is like wardrobe. And yeah, wardrobe can drive concept to some degree, but a lot of times my best imagery is when like something happens and I'm like, oh, do that, go with that, something that the model does. And then that creates like a new shift. And then that might trigger like a whole new concept for me. Or when I'm editing, then yet another concept comes along and I create the concept after the shoot. So it's kind of that
Fascinating.
same thing, but I'm using all those years of looking at art, watching films, reading books on mythology. My old band, we a lot of times drew from Celtic mythology in our lyrics, but then the lyrics would always be about modern events or heartbreak or loss or whatever. But it would always have like a underpinning of a mythological theme. So I kind of do the same thing with my work, where sometimes it's overt, where it's like, okay, we're going to depict this goddess or this mythic event. But a lot of times I find my best stuff is when I don't quite try to consciously do it, that I just kind of let it subconsciously be evoked in the act of creation and improvisation.
That's cool. It's very Jungian. What about you, Brian?
Yeah.
Well, I like something that Thomas said very much, is that he made it specific that the shooting was a different creative process than the editing was. Your idea may change completely, at least for me, if I edit, depending on what art I've looked at, what music I've listened to, between when I shot it and when I edited it. And I like the idea that when he was saying that when he was doing the shoot, there was something that sparked within the shoot, that, your original, you come up with a loose concept and then you start shooting, and then something, that certain something, even if it's 1/25th of a second, sparks something that you want to continue, and you continue to try to find that over and over during that session. So for me also, maybe a little bit on, a 3-step process sometimes is me trying to figure out, what I might want to shoot, even though I don't go in with any specific concepts. I always have concepts. I don't have a specific one where I try to stuff a model into a concept, that it may not work, but I always have these ideas in the back of my head
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
things
And that's, to me, it's like a photographer without ideas is like a musician without songs. And
There you
there's a
go.
lot of photographers that don't have ideas. Are they just like, they're just trying to recreate, existing images, and that's a good starting point. Like you have a lookbook you send to a model where I'm kind of inspired by this, but you should, to really be creative, like take it to your own interpretation of that, rather than I'm going to, even like, like I get a lot of people approach me and they want to recreate a painting, or they want to do some famous piece of art, or they, or what some other, contemporary painter relief photographer is doing. And I always say, I'm not going, I said, I might use that as a starting point, but I'm not going to try and recreate that, because that's already out there. And unless it's like, sometimes I'll reference like a classic piece of art in my work, like a Paeta or something, but I still, will do like my own little take on it. And it's just like riffing, it's like, again, it's that musical analogy. It's like a jazz musician, they have a structure, like, which is basically just a chord progression, and then you kind of improvise and riff off of it. And that to me is where the interesting stuff happens, where that's what creativity is then when you take something that's, kind of there, whatever, it's a cliche, it's a standard, and then you kind of skewer it and come up with your own take on it.
Well, you said you shoot intuitive and you wait for something to show up. Obviously, this happens quite often, or if not consistently, always. Uh, and probably does for you too, Brian, I would imagine. And but by the way, I love that idea of shooting intuitively. I find it scary because I got to get paid. I have a client, they hire me, and right, so I don't have too many opportunities. Although I really look back and say, man, that's like the ultimate form of expression right there. Because it happens to me once in a while. Like I did a shoot of my daughter today out on the beach. She's visiting us in Costa Rica for a week, and she's like, "Dad, I got to do this photo shoot." She showed me all these pictures, very 24-year-old millennial boho, and so I go out there, and I'm no pressure. So I'm being creative, and that's fun, and that's in line with what, in a very small way, with what you're talking about, Thomas. But Brian, you have a similar way with which that is expressed in your work too, because I've seen you shoot live, and I've seen you create on the fly, but in a different way. But it's still like it's the same DNA, so to speak. It's the same process. And by the way,
Well,
I just got to mention, I love Joseph Campbell too. I had a vanity license plate back in the early '90s before they were big, and it was a Joseph Campbell quote. That's how much
Follow
I
your
love.
bliss.
Yeah, that's what my license plate was. I had that for years and years and years. But sorry, Brian, what were you were gonna just?
I was just going to say, it's fun to be inspired. When a model comes in, I had a young man come in one time. He'd never shot before. I really hadn't talked to him. He walked in, and I was like, my God, you look like a serial killer.
Right.
I got an idea.
Right.
And so
Yep.
we put him in that shirt,
First thing,
like what you're wearing, Rob.
first
And
thing that
we,
pops in your head, right? A lot of
exactly.
times, yeah, that's that little voice, intuition, that if you follow it, you can get some very interesting images.
But you have to, for us, it's making them look the part, feel the part, understand the part a little
Right.
bit, and then let them run with it. We took him across town to a bachelor's house where this guy had kind of it wasn't the cleanest bathroom. It was, the guy's like a Yeti and just sheds so he was like this fur-lined bathtub we put this kid in. And gave him a gun, unloaded gun. And I just said, I just want you to pretend like you've done something awful. And 15 minutes later, this kid has his head on the sink and is crying.
Really?
Yeah. And I mean, we got great images. And then I was like, dude, I'm going to need that gun back. And so you never know. And then a girl came in one time. I was like, "Oh my God, you look like the Virgin Mary. Let's do like a Virgin Mary shoot." So we dress her up. We go in the back. She starts telling me stories, and I'm like, "Man, this chick is not the Virgin Mary." And so, but as far as like the things that you've seen me do, that comes from the found object things, like people like Robert Rauschenberg and Duchamp and all that. Robert Rauschenberg would walk around his apartment building, a couple blocks, and just find things to create art with that day. No preconceived ideas. So he let the object speak to him.
Yeah, I think. Have you ever heard of Brian Eno's oblique strategies?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a card. It's like it's like 100
Yeah.
cards that all like kind of spark like creative processes. And
I need to see those.
There's somebody. I'll send you a link. I think there's an online version of them. But one of them is create something with what is around you. Right? They're all very simple, but you think about it, and it's kind of profound, actually. So for me, it's like always like I can look right down around me, and like the texture on the floor is pretty interesting. So and a lot of like my most iconic images or stuff like emerging is like one of my most popular pieces, and that the texture on that was like my driveway. I just walked out there and I was like, oh, it's a really cool crack on the driveway. So I photographed it and layered it and used that crack to be the water line that she's coming out of. So there's something that's just, 10 feet away from where I was photoshopping. So it's that kind of thing of always kind of, looking around you. Like I was with, whenever you get a group of photographers, and let's say there's like a shoot, and you're all like, I was out in the desert outside of Vegas, and there's a bunch of photographers, and they're all like, oh, the landscapes are really cool, really gorgeous, but I saw this pile of trash, and there was I guess photos that have become emulsified, so they were kind of almost the running of the inks and everything, and it was kind of a lot of film that had been damaged. And I just started photographing these pieces and laying them out. So all around me, the photographers are like landscapes, and I'm just over here in this trash pile going, oh my God, look at this. And these are all pieces that I've used as my textures. And the same thing with going into an abandoned building, and I found a pile of textbooks that were all basically rotting away. And I use those textures constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I still, to this day, that yielded some of the coolest textures
Mm-hmm.
that I still continually use in my work. So that's, the gift of doing the found object, is that you're always constantly looking around for things that you can use in your art. And it makes you, it's like an enriched experience of life, that you're always kind of looking around and seeing things that are that can be part of your creativity.
I think you're really hitting on one thing really strong, and that is always being aware. You're not seeing things, or just viewing things. You're seeing them. You're seeing them in a different light. Your mind is open to these things. This art is all around us. And I was watching these guys critique this one young man's image once, two very famous photographers, and he'd taken a landscape image, and they were like, this is okay, but God, if you want to really do well in your photography, you're going to need to get to, Iceland or whatever. And I thought, for Christ's sake, if you can't go out in your backyard
Right.
and find something
Yeah.
and make a great image out of it, you're not a good photographer. You got a lot to learn about the elements and principles of design, what makes things interesting.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, sure. I mean, phenomenal landscapes like you find like out in the red rocks in the desert, or Iceland or whatever, are that's great. But you're absolutely right, and it's perspective too. That a lot of times, if you give 100 photographers an assignment, like go photograph this building, and you'll see there's like, you can almost grade like I guess flies in the face of the print competition, but you can almost like see the different levels of thought processes and creativity,
Mm-hmm.
where somebody will just like pull back and do like, okay, here's the building, then somebody will zone in on a certain aspect, and you just realize that it's all about perspective, and that people bring their life experiences into their imagery. So it's more than just
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, I've got a camera, I'm going to point it at this thing, voila, which is where I think where the that anti-art attitude that I've seen in some photographers is like, I don't want to intellectualize this too much. I don't want to impart too much meaning into it. I just, look at, things, I click my shutter, and, then I make an image.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, it's more than that, because it's your interpretation of things, and why you even choose to point your camera at a certain angle, or try a different setting, and or move your lights a certain way. It's all manipulation. And that's why that always cracked me up with the anti-Photoshop crowd. And I was like, everything you do with your camera is manipulation. You're not just reporting reality. You're subverting it, you're manipulating it, just by making the choices that you've made with your settings on your camera and your lens, and whether you kneel down or whether you crouch or whatever. It's all perspective. It's all manipulating and forcing your perspective on the viewer.
That's a great point. That's really a great point.
So there's
You
really
know,
there's no purism there, is there?
I've always said all photographs are a lie
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
you know, you're only seeing a small part of what that person wanted you to see and what they wanted to bring attention to. You know, you don't get a sense of the environment and things like that a lot of times.
Is it a lie, or is there an element of truth to it in one dimension or other? The
Well,
way people,
I like to think that they're like a portrait of somebody, like that you reveal an essence of that person. Like that to me is my job as an artist when I'm doing a portrait of somebody, you know, which is essentially all I do, right? I mean, pretty much 99.9% of my work is you know, the human form, but I try to get people past. So if I'm photographing like just a non-model, just a person who commissions me, you know, I'm trying to get them past their standard canned look that they give a camera, which is usually always like a phony smile. So their high school yearbook photo, their driver's license photo, right? And so I've got a series of things I do to get them past that, and then try and get at their essence, right? Try and reveal something of that person's spirit. With models, sometimes I try and get them past their standard poses that they do, because a lot of times a model is going through the motions, and especially Brian, you might feel the same way. I especially have I won't say a hard time, but I know that okay, I'm going to have to work with this model. When I get a model who's experienced and they hear that shutter click and they change a pose.
mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's like the ones that are kind of either glamour or maybe on the fashion end of the spectrum. So they're just like shutter click, pose change, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, okay, let's stop. Let's slow this down. And, you know, and music's always an important part of my shoots, right? And I try and get them into this very kind of slower, languid thing. We're trying to create a mood here. We're not trying to just, and I know and I appreciate that model's trying to give me lots of images to choose from, but I'm more interested in getting like 3 really good images from that shoot that I'm going to edit, not like, you know, 100 images that I'm going to have to, you know, look through and decide, okay, this one. You know, I'm still going to do that, but it's going to be more minute things, more subtle shifts in the mood and the position of the body, rather than, you know, an arsenal of poses that they're giving every other photographer that they work with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, going back to trying to set, you know, trying to make them look the part, trying to make them feel the part, and putting on music like what you said is huge for us too, because that sets the mood or sets the atmosphere for the part. So they, you know, I do try to have them give me different poses than they would for different outfits that they would have on. You know, that's one thing that's nice about working with people that haven't modeled much or anything. They don't have a rote set of poses that they go to that,
Right.
you know, and so they have to create on the fly. And sometimes they'll
Yep.
give you stuff that is totally out of the box for you haven't seen before. So
Yeah, because sometimes, you know, you get some people that as models that they have like a look that they always give, and what I've found to get them past that, a lot of times I say, give me a blank expression, give me just a neutral expression, just take all that off your face. And a lot of times when you do that, you're actually get at more intensity, because
Really?
it's like a phoniness to that contrived look that they're doing. You know, I photographed somebody a few months back, and she was, I could just tell. I was like, this is like this kind of quasi pouty, sexy look. And I was like, okay, I got to get her past this. So it was like, again, okay, we're doing a blank slate. I want you neutral, just neutral expression, nothing, blank. And from there, then I can kind of create mood again, you know, invoke mood. and a lot of times it's, it's the music and it's the directions that I do. I'm very just, kind of slow with the directions, but but sometimes I'll micromanage. I'll be like, slightly move your right shoulder back. Okay, move your chin down. Turn your head slightly to the left. I'm like constantly kind of fine tuning it to find that like perfect angle, and
Right.
also to get that model past the self-consciousness or the standard repertoire of poses that they do.
And at some point, when it's time to click.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm like, that's the one. This is the one. But sometimes, it's after the fact that you go, okay, this one right here.
Yeah. I want to talk about symbolism because you brought up Joseph Campbell and you mentioned symbolism. And Brian, both of you guys, your work is very, very seemingly loaded with symbolism. And whether it's brought in through Photoshop, textures, whether or not you're capturing cracks in the pavement and using that as part of your statement, for lack of a better word. But there seems to be symbolism that is pervasive with both of your creative art, your visual art. And when you talk about symbolism, I think there's a lot of truth in symbolism. And there's a lot of deep, just to get Jungian for a second, there's a lot of, what do you call that? That intelligence that we're all connected to,
collective
right?
Unconscious.
And the symbolism is a part of that possibly,
Yeah.
and it resonates with everybody. So
yeah, it's a collective unconscious and the
Yeah.
archetypes that.
Very archetypal. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Especially Brian's work, and you seem to be very somewhat consistent. Other than when you're branching off, you seem to mostly be almost very feminine, very strong visuals, strong colors. You're evoking a strong feminine energy. Sometimes you go into dark places, like the guy with the bathtub and the hairy bathtub with the gun. But predominantly, that doesn't seem to be the case for the most part. And as well as with you, Thomas, but Thomas is a little more scattered, for lack of a better word, in how your work is expressed. There seems to be more variation insofar as, not that one's right and one's wrong. There's no preference
Sure.
to either or. But if you could talk, I'd like to talk a little bit about symbolism, and I'll let Brian go first on that one. What do you got to say about that, Brian?
Well, I'll talk about the dark stuff first. When I first started, it was kind of during the goth period. So people were coming to me and they were like, dude, can you make it look like my head's cut off or whatever? And it was like, yeah, let's do that. So, and then I had a couple heart attacks and they put me on happy pills.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, can you make it look like I'm hanging myself? It's like, no, but do you have any puppies or butterflies that we could add to this shoot? So, things did change a little bit as far as like my attitude and that kind of stuff. So that has a little bit to do with how things are not so dark anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the symbolism, besides what I just said, I really don't try to explain or intellectualize anything about the work. It's, I like what Lenora Carrington said, and I got a quote here, is like, you're trying to intellectualize something desperately and you're wasting your time. That's no way of understanding. It's a visual thing.
Mm-hmm.
You understand by your own feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So, for me, if people say they hate the image, it's like, okay, well, look at somebody else's image,
Mm-hmm.
and they either like it or they don't like it. Only if they would take the image completely out of context and sexualize an image or something that I did not want, that I would be vehemently opposed to, would I say no, blah, blah, blah. But, a lot of times the things that I put in the images are just what I'm interested in at that moment or whatever. And if other people get it, that's cool. And if they don't, that's cool as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, I know that's probably not the answer you wanted.
No, I
but,
didn't
you
have
know,
I didn't no expectations. I just find it interesting.
Well, I'm kind of like what John Lennon said. He said, you know, the role of the artist is to tell people how you feel, not to tell people how to feel. So when I put this Christian symbolism and things like that, I'm not pushing this on them. But if they feel, you know, connected to that, then good for them. That's great.
Yeah, it's. I agree. It's good not to give people too much of an overt symbolism, because then it narrows. It almost like narrows the audience. So emerging. Talk about that piece again. Let me see. I'll share that so you know what I'm talking about. Is probably one of my most symbolic images, and I've sold it to a lot of different people. Let's see, go with the.
Is this the one with the crack in the pavement?
Yep. Okay, so that's it. So I've had, you know, to me, when I was making the image, when I was photographing the model, she had, again, like what Brian was talking about. She came in, one of the first things I noticed about her was she had this beautiful long hair. So I said, why don't you lean back? I want to, you know, photograph your hair more. So she leaned back, and I wasn't thinking of any kind of finished image or anything. I just photographed her. And then after the shoot, I was like going, this is kind of interesting. It kind of almost looks like she's maybe coming out of water. So I played with that idea. That was the crack in the driveway. And then I played with the coloring of it. I moved the image a little bit more to the right of her to make it look like she's coming out of the water. And call the piece emerging, which definitely suggests, you know, that she's coming forth from the water. Then the first person I sold it to was a Jungian psychologist who said to him it represented the anima, which is the feminine part of the psyche. But I've also had people who thought it was Ophelia, that she was drowning. And these are, I always look at it like all interpretations are valid. Like and that could sometimes, even somebody's interpretation of the piece can change it after the fact. Because sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I actually do kind of see that there, although that was not my intention when I created the piece. So, you know, I in terms of symbolism, you know, sometimes like, you know, overtly, like, and again, this piece right here was because, and I wasn't thinking of doing this beforehand, but the model had alopecia. So she, you know, she had no body hair at all, no hair on her eyebrows, no hair on her head.
Really?
And so I thought of like, she's like a newborn. She's like a babe. So, you know, this becomes like a paella. It's a reference to a classic, you know, classic piece, but it's also, you know, it's a mother. So she's like a Madonna. So, you know, I was like, told her to put the scarf on her head and did this image. And so that was one of those ones, again, on the fly, but because I had reference to classic art and symbolism, you know, I want these pieces to kind of resonate with people. So did am I still showing you my screen there? Okay, let me turn that off.
Kind of interject real quick while this image is still up. You know, what I love about your images, and especially this image, is that it's open to interpretation, of course, but it leaves that sense of mystery. So people can create a whole story around this image, and you're not giving them the beginning and end of the image where when they're done viewing it, they're never going to think about it again. I mean, this image is going to stay with them, and they're going to, you know, you can create your own world, whether she is drowning or if she's coming out. I mean, even though it's titled emerging, you know, she might be drowning and emerging into that world. or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Mhm.
This is a book I highly recommend. It's let's see where they go. William
Man.
Mortensen. Are you familiar with him, Brian?
I am
William
not.
Mortensen. William Mortensen. He's kind of like our spiritual godfather. He was one of the pictorialists. Ansel Adams referred to him as the Antichrist, and Ansel Adams went out of his way to have his work removed from important collections because he felt
Really?
Mortensen was like not what photography should be.
Really?
And Mortensen, he understood these principles that we're talking about of symbolism, of kind of depth, and his whole idea. You think about the command to look, and that's more than ever with all the visual imagery that people are inundated with now on social media and all around them. The way to stand out is through something that just kind of, there's something about it that makes people stop and look. So if you look at it like your image going down a news feed on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever, and there's so many images, and that's what people are just scrolling through, and all of a sudden they might stop and look. That's why, like I say, like, me and you, Brian, we both, and Rob, for the most part, right? We all photograph women, and you know, and there's a lot of photographers that they photograph women, and a lot of times with a photographer who's like just kind of on the surface, it's like you can kind of tell what kind of woman they find beautiful because that's all they photograph.
Hmm.
So they might have a proclivity for a certain body part or a
Hmm.
certain hair color, and you just see it over and over again. And I'm like, pretty woman, pretty woman, pretty woman, big
Right,
deal, so
right,
what? Big
right.
deal, so what? So to me, like, I have like an ethos. I have like a reason why I photograph women. I can trace it back to when I was a little boy, and my grandmother told me to always pray to the Blessed Virgin, and I was like 4 years old, and that, the whole concept of God having a mother, and that mother was more important. Like if you wanted something done, you went to God's mother. So that that whole concept of like a matriarchal ruler of the universe kind of seeped into my little brain. And
Hmm.
then as I got older and then started studying Joseph Campbell and Robert Graves, another one, the White Goddess, and I
Hmm.
started seeing that metaphor in so much classic art, so
Hmm.
many places. And so that's why I have so many different depictions of women, where it's not like this is like the one type that I photograph. Like I
Yeah.
can see like a goddess
Yeah.
goddess in every woman, and do that in my work. And it's like, to me, it's like a well that never runs dry. So again, it's like kind of, tying into all the things that I've studied and all the things that I've looked at that I've enjoyed, and then it's just kind of like that's the palette. Then, so and the best way to do it is to do it with improvisation and to intuition, rather than to kind of do a contrived. This is the kind of goddess I'm going to depict, and then I can kind of after the fact go, oh, okay, this is what I was doing right here.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like just hitting on all cylinders, basically.
Hmm. My brain just exploded.
So it's time for some ayahuasca, my friend.
Well, that's
And I
actually
told
one
you
of
we are gonna
it's
we are
on,
gonna
it's on my
mention
to-do list.
psychedelics. Yep.
I just let me say one thing. I want to hear from Brian because he's got that finger in front of his mouth pose that says he's got something to say. We've come around the hour, so I'd like to start winding it down. I really appreciate you guys taking the time, and I had no idea where we were going to go. And I think in many ways there's a corollary to creating works of art to running an interview like this, or a meetup like this, a mastermind, whatever you want to call it. Shit just comes up, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I've got 5 pages of notes. So
Well,
Wow.
if you guys don't know who these guys are, go Google them and just click on images or go to their websites, and you'll see what I mean. You'll get a deeper sense of what we're talking about. And peeling back these layers is like, I've never thought of that. Like my mother used to tell me all the time the same thing too. Pray to the Virgin Mary. maybe there's a connection there to why I got into photography when I was so young. And obviously we'd always joke we got into it because of the women. We wanted to photograph women and artists throughout the history of mankind.
Sure.
Besides cave paintings of,
Right.
woolly
Look at
mammoths.
the Venus de Willendorf is like probably one of the oldest works of art.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a depiction of a very what would be called a BBW nowadays. A very voluptuous full figure, and you find those all over prehistoric Neolithic Europe. Yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, now's your time, because we're going to wind her down soon. So Brian, do you have something you want to add to all this?
Yeah. Well, first I want to add that I really appreciate everybody that took the time to come and listen. We were in Atlanta, which I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to meet you, Thomas, but we were in Atlanta last week. We went to a jazz club, and in this jazz club, they had an open night where if you brought your instrument or wanted to sing, you could get up and do it. Mm-hmm. And there was only one person that came and did that. It was a young kid. And I thought, my God, how many kids need to be here viewing, seeing these experienced musicians. And this kid got up there and he played and he got some great critiques real quick, just some good feedback. And then I saw him go to the side and he watched the other drummers and he watched every move that they made, and I think if these people think they're going to go to college and come out of college and run a photography business, they're going to get their ass handed to them. Mm-hmm. They need to be listening to these type of things and going to these seminars and being open to education. Mm-hmm. It just blows my mind that, we'll go to an art gallery. We went to a number of art galleries. We really liked your high art gallery there. Mm-hmm. And you see people walk around and the average time spent in front of a piece of artwork is like 7 seconds.
Now they're putting their phone up.
Yeah. If they go back and look at it, maybe that would be great. But, they just don't. I don't know. It's like people that come to an all-day class and they don't bring a notebook. Mm-hmm. It's like, how really open are you to learning? Mm-hmm. If I've got this notepad right in front of me and I've made some notes of things that you've said tonight, Thomas. And, you always have to have that sense of wanting to learn and progressing, just like how you started the program saying that most artists are never satisfied with their work. They're always going to be searching. And, I think along the same lines, I think I'm still terrible. I'm hoping before I die, I produce something that doesn't suck, and that's why we go to all these museums and stuff. The more I learn, the more terrible I know that I am. Mm-hmm. So, but I find that, the inspiration is just, I think everybody should be visiting these art museums. Mm-hmm. They know for a fact that, it releases dopamine and endorphins and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm sure they don't want you to shoot your dopamine on top of one of the works of art or some shit. But, for the most part, you get inspired. So, I read a thing the other day. It said your art must be your best friend. It's something mm-hmm. that you must be able to go to when you're bored, when you're sad, when you're, but this inspiration, people, we give these seminars a lot of times and people want definite takeaways. So here's a definite takeaway, because people always say I'm not creative. So let me give you a perfect example. We gave you lots of ideas during this thing of how we get inspired, but just go take your favorite band, take their first album, go to the third song and make do a photo shoot based on the title of that third song. There you go. So, these chants plays a huge role. If you know anything about
Yeah.
John Cage, chance plays a huge role into things that you can, you know, interject to come up with some different and decent ideas,
Yeah.
just as a launching point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, it's like you said, you know, you know, it's always sad to me when people say they're not creative, because we are all creative as children. Like, children are all creative, and what we do and the kind of photography that we do, it's like there are basically two games that every child plays. Is that, like, people that photograph models are basically doing the same thing. First one is dress up, and that is whatever you put on, you become that character. So the costume makes, you know, creates the concept. And the second game, and this is the most important one, is make believe. And that is, we don't even need the objects. We're just going to do this. We're going to be this. We're going to create this. And that's essentially, I'm always playing those two games when I do photography.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, again, that's where creativity comes from. It's, you know, it's without, you don't have to, you know, have these like long drawn out concepts. And I've worked with people that do. I worked with an artist. She's a disabled artist. I mean, she's a model, but she's more like an artist. And she had these elaborate concepts. Her name's Jocelyn Woods, and I did a whole series with her up in Burlington, Vermont. But she sent me like these long emails, and she's, you know, she's been bedridden since she was like 16. I think she's maybe in her early 30s now. But I would like look through them, and there are all these very spiritual concepts, and I found myself like boiling them down. Like, okay, so this is the veil and the snake. Okay, you know, so I would like boil each one down to like, you know, like 3 or 4 words for each one, and then I was like, okay, because I didn't want to have my brain too much into what her concept was, as much as I wanted to then have my interpretation too. So I think it's always good to have that playful attitude we were talking about, that improvisational spirit. You know, don't worry so much about like, oh, I'm creating art, I'm trying to do something deep and meaningful, but you know, have some fun with it, and try and do something a little bit different from what you've done before, and certainly from what is, you know, the currently popular style. And I think it's always good to kind of like be looking beyond that, and whatever, you know, if everybody's shooting this, then like do something different. Like, I'm going to do the exact opposite of what they're doing. And I think that kind of attitude will suit you well in the long run.
Well, it's a good explanation of picking your favorite band, going to their first album, song 3, and creating something. There's going to be something different there. So Aaron Cooper just chimed in. Aaron, I don't know if Aaron's a guy or a girl, but I'm going to go with a guy. I really like the idea of the first thing that comes to head when you first see a person at the shoot to get an idea. How did you get most of your ideas before the shoot and communicate to someone? I think Thomas just answered that. He's a guy, LOL. Yeah, so you just answered it. You both answered any of the questions I came up with, the one on symbolism and whatever else.
I will answer him on pre-shoot communication. I think is very important, and you guys probably can attest to that. So when I'm going to work with a model, I think it's really important to be very clear and concise, and put everything in one text-based. I prefer email, or even like Facebook Messenger, Model Mayhem, whatever. I don't really like phone texting as much, but I will do it on there if I have to, because a lot of these, you know, millennials and Gen Zers, that everything is text, you know, is on the phone. But I like to just put it all, and I spell everything out. Here's the way I like makeup. Here's the way I like nails. Here's the way I like hair. Here's the kind of wardrobe I think is appropriate. Here's my attitude on shoes. Here's how long it takes me to edit. I put it all. I basically do a pre-shoot checklist. I write, you know, what it's like to work with me, and I send it to them. And I find that kind of pre-shoot communication puts them. They know exactly what to expect from me, And then when they show up, then it's a lot more. We've got all that stuff ironed out, so they're not going to be worried as much because they kind of know what to expect from me in that regards. Because I know, models will be like, oh, if you don't do that, then they're constantly like, well, how do you like the hair? Well, how do you like the makeup? Or what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And it's like, here it is, here's how it is to work with me. And you just show up, and then I'll do the rest.
Cool.
If I go back to Aaron's question real quick, and Thomas touched on this earlier, and I think we even did a webinar on creative cross-training. So instead of looking at images all the time to get your ideas from, because you'll end up aping those ideas a lot of times, is going to movies and listening to music and going to theater and going to plays and going to the opera, because you not only do you get these different characters, you also get set design, you also get lighting, you also get cinematography, and you get all these different ideas other than just a character. So all these come into play whenever you meet somebody for the first time, saying, oh my God, that reminds me of this person in this movie, or whatever. And so we're going to do something similar to that. So I think it's very important to do that creative cross training and
Awesome.
to take in as much as those different inputs as you can.
So this right here is exactly like just totally solidifies what you just said. This is one of my favorite quotes by Jim Jarmusch, the filmmaker. And I love how the use of the word steal makes people bristle, but it's like, what he's saying is you steal from anywhere that resonates with you, fuels your imagination. So he's like, devour old films, new films, music, books, paintings, photographs, poems, dreams, random conversations, on and on and on. But he talks about that authenticity is because of what speaks to your soul. And then you amalgamate all these influences. It's all filtered through your experience, your consciousness, your what your visual aesthetic is. So and I definitely agree with Brian that it's, don't just limit yourself to looking at photos or classic art, which is great. Look at Caravaggio's lighting or Vermeer's lighting, but also learn from all these other things that you're inputting into your consciousness on a daily level.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Okay. I think we'll let you guys go now. If I can also mention to the advice that you guys are putting out there, and as we conclude, Brian mentioned open mic nights. I since January, since I've been down in Costa Rica, they have 3 open mic nights a week. I've been going every night. That's scared shitless. That's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. Getting up there with me and my guitar and singing. I can't sing, right? But I consistently going up. So I had advised anybody to take what you guys have expressed and then some, but do stuff that's really outside of your comfort zone. And I'm doing it because in my head, I'm like, I got to do this. I'm scared shitless. I've never exposed myself to that feeling where you're ripping open your soul in front of all these people and you're singing. But I think, and I know, I don't think, I know it's an excellent journey. At this age of my life, 61 years old, and I'm taking this on. I'm like, what the hell? Why not?
Yeah.
Who knows where it's going to go? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's scary as hell, but it's exhilarating at the same time. And I'm sure in some way, shape, or form, it'll help my photography, my art, my photography business, and all that stuff.
It's all creativity, so it all contributes. I mean, I'm the same way. I've gotten back into playing music, and I'm completely doing it for, I started doing it for more just therapeutic reasons, and but I think I was initially was thinking, so I started messing around with video, and I went back to my old music and used that as the soundtrack, and I was like, boy, it'd be really cool to have a harp again and, you know, start creating. And so that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But I haven't thought about, I've thought about it, but I haven't even begun to like monetize it yet because I'm just,
Yeah.
you know, recording it right now. But once I create a project, then
And you're
yeah,
following
then
your
the
bliss.
marketing comes. Yes, exactly.
Brian, anything you want to add to that before I close off and let you guys get back to your lives?
Just if anybody had any questions, and if they don't have any questions now, you know, they're welcome to email me through my or message me through Facebook, or when I figure out Instagram, they can do that. But you know, sometimes questions are, you know, sometimes you're kind of scared to ask something in front of a group or whatever. So you're more than welcome to ask behind the scenes, as it were.
So I've recorded this. If anybody wants to watch the replay, send me an email and I will get you the replay. I made 4 or 5 pages of notes. I'm going to write them all out and summarize them and post them. So I appreciate you guys taking your time out. Hopefully we can do it in a couple months or so. I'm thinking maybe not. I don't want to assume that you would, but I will throw probably some ideas your way to entice you to see if we can get back and throw a few subjects.
Will there be a replay of this up on your website?
I put everything. I have an online forum, a coaching forum, and I typically put it in there. And
so for people who aren't members, they can see it?
Yeah, this is for everybody.
Okay.
So this is for everybody. And I posted it on Facebook and mentioned that anybody wants to replay, if you know of anybody, just I'll put it up on one of my blog posts, and they can download it and watch it right there. I think it's valuable. I think everything you guys have said has been absolutely invaluable for anybody wanting to grow as an artist. And the ideas, you know, we showed one image, was all we showed, one image, and all we did was talk. You know, when you think of the communication, and it's always been to me one of the most valuable forms of expression is communication, and ideas come out of that. You know, I was extremely shy as a child, and I didn't come out of my shell until I was 31, and I joined Toastmasters, right? And I got very skilled at speaking in front of crowds for that reason, because I was so shy. But I just feel that communication is so important, and it's hopefully not a lost art. I don't think it is. I mean, you look at guys like Jordan Peterson packing in audiences of 3,000 people, and they talk for 3 hours about ideas.
Right.
I love it. Joe Rogan podcasts. These are important ideas, guys, and I thank you very much for sharing them with us. And we got a peek into your lives, the way your thoughts are formulated. It's been really something. So I really appreciate it. So,
well, it's a privilege to be asked, and privilege to be here with Thomas and you. And it's validating for somebody like me. So really appreciate it.
Cool. Well, I appreciate hearing that. Okay. Well, maybe we'll do it again soon. I appreciate it, guys. You all have a good night and take care. Thanks again.
Thanks for having us.
Good night, guys.